Hello and welcome. E2, San Diego Green Building Council, and US Green Building Council, Los Angeles are so pleased to have you join us today. We have a great program for you, and we'll be hearing from experts and California policymakers about how we can decarbonize our building stock and ensure that new construction in California is not only good for the climate, but good for the economy. My name is Andy Wonder, and I lead policy for E2 on the West Coast. I'll be getting us started today. First, a couple of admin notes. This event is being recorded and you have all been muted, and you'll stay muted throughout the call. If you have any questions for our Q&A section, please pass them through the chat function, where we will be taking them up at the end of the session towards the end of the hour. And finally, at 5 p.m., following a question and answer session, we'll be hosting a networking event between our three groups. All you have to do is stay on this Zoom and you'll get to meet with like-minded business people from across the state. Okay, so who are your event organizers? I'll start with E2. E2 is a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and professionals who advocate for smart policy that is good for the economy and good for the environment. E2's more than 10,000 members and supporters work and do business in every state and come from diverse backgrounds ranging from clean energy to clean tech, to real estate, to finance and beyond. Essentially, we bring the economic case for smart climate policy. Our members recognize that climate change is a business risk and that building decarbonization is a ripe climate action opportunity. We also recognize that climate action is the greatest economic opportunity of the 21st century. All electric buildings are cheaper to build and cheaper to operate, and they're also safer to work and live in. And our members know firsthand that smart public policy can create the market structures needed to drive job growth in the clean energy economy. Building decarbonization will put Californians to work retrofitting and making energy efficiency improvements in our existing building stock. And by setting the right codes for new construction, we can also ensure homes are EV and solar ready and put Californians to work getting them there. Our E2 members understand that mitigating California's building emissions are indeed good for the economy and good for the environment. And our members have helped pass policy in the legislature that is currently spurring market development in the sector. And we've worked with city councils to pass ambitious local building codes and are very excited to be working with the California Energy Commission and Commissioner McAllister to bring the business voice in support of a strong Title 24 code. One thing our E2 members know is that policymakers need to hear from California's business leaders, and your voice can really move the needle. If you'd like to work with E2 to help pass policy to transition our state to a low carbon economy, shoot me an email. Shoot my event partners an email. We'd all love to work with you. So I'm excited to pass the mic to my co-hosts at this event so they can share more about their organization. Colleen, please take it from here.
Thanks, Andy. My name is Colleen Fitzsimmons. I'm the Executive Director of the San Diego Green Building Council. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and collaborate to move us towards true sustainability. And we define that to include regenerative and equitable practices. We have a network of architects, landscape architects, engineers, builders, contractors, sustainability consultants, homeowners, basically anyone interested in green building and climate policy. And we focus as an organization the last couple of years on decarbonization, on-site water reuse, equity, and health and wellness. We're one of the founding members of the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition, and we're kicking off a portable induction cooktop loaner program this month, which we're super excited about. We always offer our members educational opportunities and hands-on programs to learn more while giving back to our communities. Thanks, and I'll hand it over to Ben.
Thank you, Colleen. My name is Ben Stapleton. I'm the Executive Director here at the US Green Building Council, Los Angeles. You may be noticing a theme here amongst our organizations. While we're affiliated with the Green Building Council that runs the LEED credential that many of you know and love, our mission is really to accelerate sustainability in the built environment here in Southern California. Very similar to Colleen, we do that primarily through community engagement and education. And our members are really driven to make an impact locally in their communities. And include architects, engineers, construction professionals, developers, planners, you name it, anyone who believes that really that the built environment can be a place for us to really create change that can have impacts that roll out throughout the communities we live in. And we believe that the built environment is honestly the fabric that knits everything together. It all comes together in our buildings. And that's why the content we're here to talk about today is so important. If we can really focus on decarbonizing our buildings, it can have so many other impacts on the rest of our society. And we really are excited to dive into this topic full force.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Colleen. Okay, let's get to our panelists. We have a great lineup, and we will start in a minute with Marian Vorgensen. She's a senior scientist with Natural Resources Defense Council, and she's going to set the stage for us on the why and the how of building decarbonization in California. Then we'll hear from Los Angeles Council member and former President Pro Tem of the State Senate, Kevin De Leon, on his vision for the city of Los Angeles. Next, California Energy Commissioner Andrew McAllister will discuss state policy opportunities on building decarb, including a deep dive on the ongoing Title 24 state building code refresh. And then we'll have Tara Lawson-Remer, San Diego County Board Supervisor, discuss action that the county is planning to take. We're thrilled with this rockstar lineup, and they're going to paint a picture of building decarb opportunities from our capital to our counties to our cities. Okay, so without further delay, I'm pleased to introduce Marian. Her work at NRDC champions stronger climate policies by providing analysis and strategic guidance to help us shift to efficient renewable energy. She works closely with policymakers and stakeholders at the state, regional, and national levels. Marian, take it from here, please.
Thanks, Andy. And thanks everyone, the hosts, as well as the many, many people that I see on the phone here. I know many of your names as business leaders who have helped with legislation or have worked to adopt local reach codes in the 42 plus local governments around the state. It's really a wonderful group that I see here. And some of you I don't know. I'm very excited to be able to speak in front of some really amazing, wonderful local and state leaders who are really getting the work done at all levels of our government. I'm here to just sort of kind of like do the overview. As you may know, buildings are like about 25% of the state's emissions. They're a huge chunk of what we need to deal with, and they also really directly impact the daily lives of our citizens. So they're both an environmental issue and a human and personal opportunity, I would say. All of the buildings in our state consume or use as much as natural gas as is burned in all of the power plants in the state, but there's about 7 times as much NOx that actually come from those buildings. So there's a health aspect as well to the policies that we pursue around building electrification and building decarbonization. The good news with this area of work is the products and technologies are available currently. In the US, about 60% of all buildings are currently built all electric, and about 40% of those at least have heat pump technologies, which is a super efficient technology that is essentially able to absorb the heat from outside the building and put it inside in the winter and do the reverse in the summer. It's about 300% efficient, and it's one of the technologies that we've been promoting through various rebate programs and technology support programs throughout the state that allows us to be both super efficient, offer really great technology to buildings, and to meet our climate goals in a very efficient and direct way. One thing that we need to think about, of course, is cost. Another piece of good news is that it's been often lower cost and lower cost to operate over the long run to use some of these technologies. There's a recent report released 2 weeks ago from the PUC that compared the cost estimates for 2030 and including any wildfire costs in our electricity system that would be used to deal with some of the issues we're dealing with wildfires right now, showing that if we electrify both cars and the appliances in our home, bills for the average customer will actually be lower as compared to if they're using both gasoline in their cars and gas in their homes. So there's a good cost story here too that's really promising. One of the other things that we need to think a lot about for this topic is equity and who's part of the solution and who could be left behind if we're not careful. One of the things we're quite concerned about is that as many homes in the state electrify, the folks left on the gas system will end up paying for the full cost of the system, and that's going to be more and more per customer. And so we really have to be thinking about some of the equity implications of the transitions we make. I think we've done, and we are continuing to do, and Andrew McAllister will talk about some of the work we're doing in new buildings and getting code and the new buildings that are built in the state to be all electric and to avoid the sort of investment in new gas pipelines that we would have to, remove later or deal with later. That's a huge part of what we need to do, locking in any new buildings being all electric and making sure we're not digging that hole deeper in terms of extending the gas pipeline system more. The other piece of it that I think needs the lion's share of our attention and funding, honestly, in the state is around existing buildings. And I'd like to share just one slide that talks about some of the existing buildings in the state. So let me share my screen really quickly. We did a study just looking at homes in the state that have households with 80% of the area median income and below. And I think that we need to, as a full state, and we're starting to do this on the policy level, but it's something I just want to bring to all of yours attention since you're leaders in the architecture fields and various other business endeavors, that we need to be able to really drill down into who is living in these homes, not just thinking about the homes themselves or thinking about technologies in particular. So we did a study looking at like low-income households in the state and where do they live. We looked at geographies, do they rent or own, what building types. And I think, you know, one of the things that sort of comes out from this is that there's a lot of renters, obviously, and they don't often have choices about what's in their building. And they're often quite vulnerable in terms of both the rents that they pay and their ability to stay in their homes. And that's a huge issue, especially now with, you know, certainly the backlog of rents that the last year with COVID has seen, as well as utility bills that remain unpaid. And that's a big issue for a lot of folks just to stay in their home. So there's renters, there's also owners of homes. One of the interesting things we found is that over half of low income Californians live in single family homes, often outside of dense urban areas. And that may be a different solution in terms of technologies and support. And many of those folks actually own their own homes as well. The other thing, and I think Councilmember De Leon will have a lot to say about this, is a lot of low-income families live in the Southern Coast area. And a lot of those folks are in actually high-rise multifamily buildings. So we need to be thinking about specific solutions, both technology-wise, but also in terms of getting access to these solutions in terms of financing and direct funding, and how we can coordinate multiple programs throughout the state so that these, so that everyone can participate in a transition, and it's not just new buildings or not just wealthy people, that everyone's actually part of this. Let's see. Yep, there you go. I think I'll end there if Councilmember De Leon is ready to speak, and I can kind of answer questions as we go along the way.
Thank you, Marian. That was excellent. Really appreciate that. Okay, let's pass the mic over to Councilmember De Leon. Over the course of a remarkable career, the council member has been an educator, activist, community organizer, and the first Latino leader of the California State Senate over 130 years. He's helped champion a number of California's landmark climate policies, and perhaps most notably SB 100, our 100% clean energy bill. For the last decade, the council member has represented Senate District 24, which overlaps with a significant portion of the 14th District of Los Angeles, which he currently represents. Pleasure to have you with us today, council member. Please take it from here.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you for allowing me to share a few words with each and every one of you. I want to thank you for the years of collaboration during my time in the legislature, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you in my new role as city council member in Los Angeles. As many of you know, during my tenure at our state capital, I chaired the select committee on energy efficiency, where we studied how to unlock private capital and accelerate energy efficiency projects, but especially in large scale high-rise buildings. In my legislation, Senate Bill 350, most famous for taking on the oil industry. Many forgot that the legislation actually doubled down on the state's energy efficiency standards for California's buildings, 50%. I also, as you know, partnered with Tom Steyer on Prop 39 to close an egregious corporate tax loophole for out-of-state multinational corporations that invested billions of dollars in helping local schools, community colleges reduce their energy load through HVAC systems and improving windows and the likes. So while I'll always be fixated on cleaning my district's dirty air, I recognize that one of the single largest sources of CO2 is from our building stock. And we need to move away from fossil fuels to heat, coal, and feed those buildings. I believe that we all need to follow SMUD's lead up in Sacramento and start incentivizing consumers to replace their water heaters with heat pumps. We've got to change that word heat pumps. And we need to encourage homeowners to move away from outdated technologies and move into the current century. You know, we also need a roadmap to eliminate, obviously, gas from new buildings prospectively. So I'm working closely with Councilmember Paul Koretz, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you, how we design a plan that's equitable as we move away from natural gas starting in new construction. But how we do it is critical. And I want to make certain that when we do this, that we're actually very successful. Now, you know that you have an ally in me on this very topic, but I have enough bandwidth to fight and reduce transportation emissions in LA. We need to eliminate oil drilling in the city, and that's abutting mostly poor neighborhoods. We need to accelerate the installation of charging infrastructure so that everyone can fairly access electric vehicles. And finally, we need to get diesel dirty trucks off the roads once and for all, replace it with electric as well as hydrogen powered vehicles. As many of you all know, I have 9 major freeways that crisscross my district like a serpent that chokes the air, the oxygen out of a young boys and girls' lungs. And I won't stop fighting until the cars on those freeways are zero emissions. We're at a crucial period in our nation's history with a new administration in Washington, D.C. But as we know, it's not enough to dominate either the executive or bicameral legislative branch. We need the leadership that rises to the occasion as the 5th largest economy on planet Earth. And to put this in context, there's only 4 economies larger than that of our own GDP. That is the United States of America in the aggregate, China, Japan, Germany, and then our very own California. We're ahead of, Boris Johnson's United Kingdom, Macron's France, India, Modi's India, as well as Vladimir Putin's Russia, Brazil, and Italy. And largely because we have really, moved fast forward on our clean energy policies. I want to say a couple things. That obviously you all know me, almost entirely, primarily from, SB 100, moving California to 100% clean, renewable, zero carbon energy, decarbonizing our grid, all by the year 2045. I've always been very open and public about. I believe that we'll actually get there by the year 2035 as we unlock and unleash the capital on the sidelines to find and create and innovate these technologies that are very critical to be that bridge to get us to actually 100% clean renewable energy. And during that period, how we actually create real economic growth, real tangible jobs that can't be outsourced or offshored to any, must be done physically, on site. But as we move towards those goals, there was a period, unquestionably, and very progressive, innovative, creative, blue state like California, where we had so many naysayers who said it couldn't be done. We couldn't move towards a renewable portfolio standard, decarbonizing our grid, how we power our businesses as well as our homes, how we move clean electrons, on that grid to keep the lights on, to have that microwave oven, to have that coffee maker on when we enjoy that cup of joe early in the morning. But we went from 0 to 20%, and then from 20 to 33%, and then from 33%, had the honor, to take it from 33 to 50% through SB 350, I should say, and then 50% to 100%. And oftentimes folks ask me, why did I do that when I had just recently passed Senate Bill 350? But because then President Donald Trump was elected in 2016, he made very clear, credible threats that he would pull out of the Paris Accords, the Conference of Parties 21. And as a result, California had to rise to the occasion and be that beacon of hope and opportunity, not just for other subnational governments throughout the United States, but throughout our own Western Hemisphere and throughout the world. That it didn't make a difference who occupied the White House, that California would move forward with our clean energy policies. And then again, to underscore and reiterate, be that beacon of hope and opportunity during a very dark, period in our country. So it's about leadership rising to the occasion and making sure that all those naysayers, back in 2002, our carbon dioxide and CO2 equivalent output was roughly about 108 million metric tons of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent. That's roughly about 77 million round trips from LAX to London Heathrow Airport, round trips back and forth. We have almost cut that in half to about 66, millions of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent as we move forward with our progressive policies. But that's when we etch it in stone. That's when it's statutory. I'm a big fan, obviously, as lawmakers, of creating laws. Executive orders are fantastic, but at the end of the day, you want it etched in stone. You want it to be statutory. And I know that my good friend Andrew is on this webinar as well, to the good work he's been doing at the CEC and the good work that he's been doing for a very long time on the issue of energy efficiency. So we have an incredible opportunity, as was being mentioned a few moments ago, how we hardwire as well the issue of equity and making sure that every single child has an opportunity to breathe clean air. It shouldn't be your zip code, your financial wherewithal, your educational attainment that gives you access, if you will, to the latest, the greatest, the greenest and cleanest, the most innovative, clean energy technology. That's not enough, as we know, in the aggregate. If only certain segments of our population have an energy efficient home, battery storage, a charging station, DG, rooftop solar, as well as a EV, not to pick winners or losers, whether it's an EV or some other technology, hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. We have to make sure that we democratize the benefits of our climate change, our climate action policies, because when we do so, everyone has an opportunity to be part of this growing economy. Everyone has the opportunity to breathe clean air. Everyone has an opportunity to be much more resilient and less vulnerable to the severe catastrophic consequences of climate change. And as obviously, given the demographics of a state like California, given the demographics of a state, or I should say a city like LA, which is 50%, half of the city of LA is Latino. That means that everyone has to participate. And it's not just the free market forces, but it's intentional, purposeful policies that make sure that we hardwire into policymakers' thinking. And you'll be shocked and surprised, not all policymakers, even Democrats, factor this in. One thing is articulating it, and one thing is to actually, move it towards action. So in me, you have a friend and ally. I thank you very much for the time that you give me to share a few words with each and every one of you as we continue to move forward in solidarity and use the political power, the political capital that we have to effectuate the policy changes at the various levels of government to make sure, once again, that we can unleash that capital and we can move forward with the projects that will be transformative for our city, for our state, for our nation, and for the entire world. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. And once again, I appreciate an opportunity to share a few words with each and every one of you.
Thank you, Council Member. That was great. Really appreciate your time. Okay, now I'll hand it over to California Energy Commissioner Andrew McAllister, who is serving his second term on the commission. At the Energy Commission, he leads policy areas of energy efficiency and energy assessments, with energy efficiency including the building energy efficiency standards, appliance efficiency, and load management. Commissioner, it's an honor to have you on with us. Please take it away.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Andy, and all the organizers. It's really a great time to be a Californian and to be here in California doing this kind of work. And I guess, and I'm certainly grateful for this opportunity to be in front of a bunch of leaders and thought leaders and leaders in action in this arena. I hope everyone's well, and hopefully we're moving towards some sort of transition towards normalcy, and we could do a meeting like this in person at some point, although maybe not nearly as much as before, right? So fingers crossed that on that, and let's all continue to support one another as we deal with the rest, hopefully the tail end of the pandemic, and really get through it healthy and safe. I also wanted to just say a couple words about the dynamic here with the new federal government. I mean, it's the sense of partnership actually with the federal government is a breath of fresh air now. And I don't want to get too much into federal politics, but I think that you're just seeing action after action, and the appointments reflect the diversity of our country, the emphasis on climate, and all the elements of climate, and certainly equity, workforce, and all the underpinnings of that is just so heartening. And actually, it's going to have real world consequences. President Biden just signed the big stimulus bill, COVID recovery, et cetera, bill today. And so that's going to result in some opportunities for federal funds to come to California to do the sorts of things we care about. So that's all very positive. And I think is going to allow us to kind of move forward with less defensive tactics and much more proactive and collaborative approach. So that's a really great shift. You know, we're in the climate crisis, and you know, Marian, I have a lot of the points that Marian made in my notes that I wanted to get through, so I won't repeat those, or at least I'll repeat as little as possible. But I want to just talk about a little bit the broader framing too. That, you know, we're in a climate crisis. You all know that. We saw the wildfires, heat waves, you know, and now they're increasingly at larger scale, and they're testing our energy systems. And you know, what happened in Texas was orders of magnitude bigger than what happened in California last August. And so, you know, the investment that we have to make in our infrastructure is much higher than it's going to only increase, and that's on both the electricity and the gas side. Gas safety obviously is a huge issue as well. The legacy gas system that we have needs investment in safety. So the PUC report that Marian referred to, you know, does show that both sets of rates are going to increase significantly in the near term. And so that's something we have to help people mitigate, right? As Pro Tem De Leon said. So last thing I'll say, just as an intro, I want to just highlight the equity issue. It really is an organizing theme in state government, and certainly at the Energy Commission. You know, in deed as well as in word. Our programs that I'll touch on briefly, SB 1477, AB 841, which, you know, probably many of you, including Marian, have had a hand in getting through the legislature. Those focus on disadvantaged communities, and it's a significant amount of money. And we have to do that. We really have to flip the equation to start with disadvantaged communities and move through helping to transform markets for these technologies, really with a focus on disadvantaged, a focus on the low income and the folks who really can't afford the capital, and then sort of work up from there. That's a little bit of a flip to the program structures that we've used historically. For example, you know, with the solar, solar incentive programs that for 15 years sort of went from a little bit expensive down, you know, top down. So, you know, that's I think also a positive development. So in California, we have, you know, a variety of policy levers. You know, I'm going to talk about CECs and the energy piece of the equation and Title 24, the building code. But there are other policy levers for decarbonization. You know, air quality certainly is one of those, and we have powerful state authority there. The CPUC directs a lot of ratepayer funds to policy-driven goals. Local governments, as everyone has mentioned, are also, you know, leading in really important respects, and not just with REACH codes, but also the CCAs that are doing really innovative things. And you know, I could talk about lots of aspects of those, but I think you know, the local tailoring of energy, of the approaches to clean energy generally and decarbonization are creating a lot of I think market pull. And even though I think we're still a bit on the front end of the implementation. So, and local governments are also investing in their own buildings. You know, we need all these tools in the toolbox. So on part 6 of the Title 24, that's the building energy efficiency standards that the California Energy Commission shepherds every 3 years through a really massive stakeholder process. And the status update for right now is that we just wrapped up a round of comments on the draft regulations on the express terms. And we got a large number of comments, lots of meaty feedback. And now, you know, the staff is going through those. We're looking at those, and we actually will respond to every single comment. That's a part of the requirements of developing the building code. And so those comments represent very diverse viewpoints. And you know, the process is really the lifeblood of the code update, you know, and it's working. We really appreciate all the input. We're listening to stakeholders and incorporating a lot of their feedback. So there's, you know, a huge amount of interest, which is great. And the creativity that is really emerging in the decarbonization realm is pretty awesome. So there's a lot of analysis that goes behind the building code. And so, you know, fundamentally that analysis helps us push the envelope as much as we can and enables us to have the discussions, like climate specific, climate zone specific energy budgets, and really, modeling buildings and figuring out what that energy budget's going to be, and figuring out what the energy design ratings are where they're going to fall. This time we've aligned the metrics that we use to judge the performance of a building to really align with carbon. And I think that's an underappreciated element of the building code, but the code increasingly with a source energy metric is going to map onto carbon emissions really well. And so there's going to be a built-in incentive to increase the performance of the building along that axis of emissions. And that hasn't been the case before for kind of historical reasons. We've really focused on energy per se, and not necessarily the source of energy. The consumer end of energy, not necessarily the source. So and then updating a bunch of different parts, solar, moving some of those elements to the multifamily sector, pairing with battery storage increasingly, for the first time actually having a battery requirement in the multifamily sector. And also requiring electric ready and storage ready in the low-rise residential. So there's some elements of the building code update. Bottom line is that we're future-proofing the building code for continued decarbonization. And this the biggest thing we're doing is aligning is really ramping up the market for heat pumps. And, Marion mentioned the heat pumps, they're inherently more efficient than combustion. They get huge efficiencies. There are very efficient ones that get more than 300%. So, I think those 80% of on-site residential emissions that are the two main heat sources, which is water heating and space heating, are the lion's share of the emissions in homes, and flipping those to heat pumps will be huge. So that's super exciting, and it's really we've as the code stands. I don't want to gauge the final, right, because it's still in process, and I don't want to sort of prejudge exactly where we'll end up. But it really is going to make compliance with heat pumps the most straightforward path for builders. And so I think that's a real game changer. It really lays the groundwork for where we're going in this code and future updates. So, the California building code is already the strongest, the most aggressively decarbonizing building code in the country. And this is going to make it even lower carbon. So, there are some barriers. I don't want to minimize those. I think there's a lot, as Marion said, there's tons of good news here. The marketplace is primed to scale up these technologies. And I will, the electric ready actually includes not just on the, we're going to do heat pumps for heating, but the electric ready is all the other loads that currently are natural gas, or cooking and clothes drying and that sort of thing. And so when you build a new building, you'll need to put in, if you don't put in an electric device, you'll have to put in the plug so that when it gets replaced, it will be electric. The transitions of this magnitude do take a little bit of doing. And so, the heat pump marketplace is actually, the heat pump water heater marketplace is pretty small. The bidirectional heat pump in California, the penetration is actually quite low. And, the EV, I'll just compare to the EV, executive order, EVs by 2035 will be, all electric. And no internal combustion engines, and that's a massive shift, and it's already just moved markets across the globe. And so heat pumps need not that much time, but they're going to need a little bit of time to work out the kinks in the supply chain and to really go completely, every building. I mean, these are minimum standards that we're talking about. So we know that even when things appear to be simple, they can produce some hiccups. So, I think the one issue that I'm really concerned about is the bill impacts. And so we're doing a bunch of analysis about that. We've talked about the rates, and in cooler climates, bills could actually go up in the near term in some parts of the state. And so we need to look really carefully at that. the equity concerns are really front and center, as I said. For historical reasons, in California, we have really pervasive gas distribution, and it's not necessarily the conversation we're having in the building code, but the building code discussion is sort of at the front end of the conversation about the natural gas system, the gas system as a whole. And so the equity concerns about, as we electrify, which we're going to do, then there are fewer people left on the gas system. And also we're making all these investments in gas safety, as we have to. And so gas rates are likely to go up, and who's going to be left on the gas grid but the people who can't afford to do it. So we've got to figure out how to have that conversation more broadly, and figure out a way not to leave the least among us hanging with the gas grid. There are ways to do that, and we've got a few programs which I'm going to talk about in a bit. But the fundamentals are the path where we're landing. I think is a solid place, and it's sort of education and the interaction of commission and stakeholders are really ending up with a package that's in a balanced place and sets a good stage for the future. So we also have authority in Part 11. It's CalGreen, and so we've there's some actions we can do there potentially. We're on the existing buildings. We're doing the Assembly Bill 3232 report. We've done a lot of modeling for that. And I totally agree that the existing buildings is really where the hard nut to crack. And so there's a lot of great stuff going on there too, for sure. And we need to not only, so the new construction, I would say, is basically a given at this point, that we're gonna get to all electric in the near term. Certainly this code cycle, the next code cycle will be, for at least the low-rise residential, I think will be there. Some technology developments in the other building sectors are probably needed. If we just take, if we take SB 100 as a given, basically, that we're going to get to 100% renewables, then it's basically dealing with the on-site gas emissions as the clearest path to further reductions, right? So the least, electric is the least obstructed path to get there. And so in the existing buildings, we have to think about the kind of scale. So, if we're going to really move the needle on those emissions, we've got to replace on burnout. The replacement market has to be just massive. And so we've really got to look at scaling up that marketplace. And we've got some programs that are aiming to do that. And they have a fair amount of resources in them, but it's nowhere near enough to get the job done completely. So, as a state, we really need to focus on that as well and get capital, use our public-private partnerships, leverage our programs. We know how to do that, but it's going to take a real a series of conversations with the legislature and the agencies and the capital markets. Let's see, I want to just wrap up by touching quickly on a couple of other things. We also have some other authorities, the appliances. We do a lot of, Title 20, our appliance efficiency regulations, and some new authority that is complementary to those appliance efficiency regulations that is going to work to figure out how best to require appliances to have load flexibility, to have flexible capacity, so that they can respond to the grid, to the grid and carbon signals potentially, so that they can really participate in the grid as a resource. We've got another authority that we're working on that I'm super excited about, which is Load Management Standards Authority. And it is similarly, it's developing the infrastructure to send the rate signals and other signals, including potentially carbon content, congestion, capacity constraints, that kind of thing, to literally millions of appliances and to buildings all over the state, and even in a targeted way where you had a pocket that's congested, for example. So in terms of making buildings a reliability resource, and we need this. If we had this kind of capacity last August, then we probably wouldn't have had outages. We could have used it, we could have called on it, and it would have been a great resource. So so we're implementing that kind of in earnest at this point. But it's really exciting because it does complement the decarbonization investment. So as we're making these investments, we can really do active efficiency. We can do heavy duty energy efficiency, electrification, and load flexibility all at the same time. And that really is the best way, and I'll wrap up with this, that complementary set of goals, of functions for our buildings and appliances, it does really all of what we need, most of what we need. We have to make sure we do it equitably, but that combination can help our reliability. It's the best, cheapest way, so it protects ratepayers, and it gets us to our decarbonization goals. And so those three complementary goals, those three legs of the stool, really our buildings can be a fundamental resource for that. And you throw in the electrification of transportation, and the state is really on a great path to fully decarbonize. So with that, I'll end up and we'll entertain some questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We do have one more speaker, but I do know that LA and San Diego GBC's members and E2's 2,500 California business leaders are quite excited about Title 24, and we're all very excited to help you and your fellow commissioners pass the strongest code possible. No doubt Title 24 is the opportunity that's good for the economy and good for the environment. Okay, last but certainly not least, we are thrilled to hear from San Diego County Supervisor Tara Lawson-Remer. Tara is a third-generation San Diegan and served as a senior advisor in the Obama administration before coming to the county. She is now focused on implementing a bold county climate action plan to fight climate change and create new economic opportunities for local businesses and workers. Thanks, Tara. Take it from here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think what I have to put out there is at this point more aspirational than anything else. I think we have been held back by a county for 30 years that has been focused on doing as little as possible. So our real impetus has been to just radically shift the culture, direction, and orientation of how the county thinks about its work and what we're focused on doing at the county. So what we have a couple different processes moving, and I want to just outline them for you all here briefly. The first, which is something I'm really excited about, is we launched a plan to put together a regional sustainability plan to get to zero carbon by 2035. And that was the first thing we did on January 12th. And what we are doing is undertaking a process to kind of flipping questions on their head. Instead of thinking, how do we do a little bit better, or how do we look for, additive reductions here or there, we're saying, let's just look at the San Diego County region in a holistic way. And if our goal is really ambitious, is just to get to zero carbon by 2035, what does that mean? What does that mean across all sectors? What does that mean in transit? What does that mean in land use? What does it mean in terms of where we build and how we build and what kind of buildings we build? What does that mean in terms of the power sector and the power grid? And so we are partnering with UCSD and USD. They're working together to do this work. And it's going to have a number of iterations where right now it's in a very much an early mapping process. It's the same folks who sort of did the deep decarbonization project at a federal level. And they are the ones that are leading this work. So the initial groundwork, the technical groundwork for the regional sustainability plan. And they will be coming back. I don't recall the exact date, but I think it's in May with sort of like a very, very initial roadmap of next steps for some, very preliminary community input and conversations and stakeholder tables. And then they're going to be going back, taking that input and doing a much deeper dive and sort of mapping out, what does this mean across all of these different sectors? And then we'll be coming back for another round of stakeholder engagement and community conversations. And then the last iteration of the work will be to translate these pretty aspirational big picture ideas around, sector by sector sort of scientific pathways to zero carbon to specific policy levers and policy interventions that would be applicable in multiple jurisdictions across the San Diego region, some of which will be at the county, I'm sure some of which will be in Sandag, some of which will be in our cities. So that last stage of the project is to say, okay, well, given the sort of technical pathways that we see, what are the policy levers that are available in all of these jurisdictions? So it's a pretty big think project. And you know, our purpose was really to say, look, we need a roadmap of how we get to zero carbon by 2035, and we need a roadmap that we can't argue about, where there's no debate that needs to happen, that we know that this is where we need to go. And so that's why we wanted to put together you know, a process to do that research and lay that foundation. So that's what's happening over the next year. And I'm really glad you all are focused on it, interested in it, because right now is sort of the easy part with the mapping. The hard part's going to happen next year when we start fighting about implementation, because that's when the rubber really hits the road. And that's when people start realizing that they might not like this as much as they thought they did. So I think we're going to be up for some really tough fights next year once people see what it means to get to zero carbon. That being said, I am hopeful. You know, one of the charges we gave to this working group was to really focus on equity and to think about green jobs and green building and a green transition that also centered good jobs and sustainable jobs. You know, and putting that front and center and saying, you know, we need to think about these equity issues from the outset and at the beginning, and not try to look at them and tack them on at the end. I do hope that that's going to help us foreground considerations around equity and jobs and sustainable jobs, and those not become, you know, sort of the big sticking points on the back end. So that's one big process we have underway. The second big process we have underway involves the climate action plan. So as I'm sure all of you know, the county has been sued many times for a climate action plan that was so bad it didn't even meet minimum state standards. So we are now in the process of revisiting and rethinking that climate action plan. And so currently there is a new EIR that's being undertaken. It's a supplemental EIR. And is going to come back with a whole series of recommendations about what we need to do in the CAP. And there's going to be some pretty big debates there. I think most of them are going to center around, does this CAP only concern the unincorporated areas, or does this CAP also have to take into account, you know, the region as a whole? So to be very specific, you know, when we're looking at, say, for example, VMT standards, are those VMT standards for the unincorporated regions, or are baselines the whole region of San Diego County? So it's going to be those kinds of technical questions where we are going to be seeing some, I think, pretty challenging fights coming down the pipeline. So putting this all on your radar, because obviously this is a huge priority for me, but it doesn't mean we're necessarily going to have the votes, even though we do have a board that's more open to taking action on climate than we've ever had before. But I think there's a lot of education that still needs to be done around these issues. So, you know, those are things that we need to be thinking about. So that's the second big process. And then the third thing I just want to put out there, it's not a process in the same way, but I think it's important for you all specifically to have on your radar. We are in a process of internally moving the county towards zero carbon buildings by 2035. And that's really just about the county buildings. So there's a lot of retrofitting involved in that, but there's also a lot of sequencing regarding what gets built and when and why with any new county construction. And so that is a new direction. It hasn't been locked in yet. We're still in the process of figuring out how to make that happen, but I'm feeling quite confident that we do have the votes, and we have been laying the foundation internally to move that process, which I think is really exciting as well. You know, I think the first thing that we can do as a county is at the very least get our own buildings in order, and there's a lot of them. So I want to just stop there. I'm not a person who likes to talk too much. I more prefer to go get things done. So that's really what we're up to. And let me just stop and take questions.
Thank you, Supervisor Lawson-Remer. I'm going to invite up our other panelists here so that we can do some Q&A. And I think my first question, really kind of building on some of your more recent comments is, given the increasing number of natural disasters we've had, some of the climate impacts here in California to our electric grids, we've seen power shutoffs, we've seen other challenges. How do we help this transition potentially away from natural gas to all electric alternatives? What kind of conversations or incentives do we need to really see for this shift to occur? And maybe I'll start with you, Marion, just to kind of give us a little bit of a technical insight of that, and then we go back to Tara for a moment.
So many pieces to that question.
I know, it's the most complicated one, right? We have to start there.
Like, that's my whole job, and some other people's do it. Let's see. I mean, I think this question of the lack of reliability or the fears about reliability in California need to be addressed head on. I mean, we actually have one of the most reliable grids in the world. We had some blips last year, and I'll tell you, like, we're going to be fixing those blips just because folks want reliable internet and be on Zoom calls. And we will, and the commission is working on that. There's tons of money being put into this. We have so many resources that we're not using to deal with reliability, like demand response, like actually directly modulating the controls in people's homes and businesses. There's a whole slew of things that we haven't leveraged to the extent that we could. Storage resources, there's a lot at our fingertips that we can avoid most of the problems we've seen. In addition, there's like multiple proceedings and multiple sets of analysis going on related to reliability in fires as well. Narrowing the groups of folks who have to be shut off, being really selective about how that's done, and having local power supply so you could actually have reliability met all year round, all hours. So I think that will sort itself out. The other part of your question was really around, like, how do we make this transition? And there's so many different things going on in the state. As both myself and Commissioner McAllister talked about, you're starting with new buildings. We're making encouraging and then requiring pieces of new buildings, and potentially all new buildings eventually to be all electric. That actually drives a huge amount of new work in the state. That means that contractors and vendors and suppliers are going to be ready to supply everyone, not just the new homes market, but there'll be this sort of like driver that we haven't seen in California because we've been 90% plus gas in terms of our end uses for space heating and water heating. There's also a ton of new incentive programs. I think we have something like $500 million of incentive programs like coming down the pipeline, whether that's energy efficiency programs through the Energy Commission that have been efficiency that now can be used for fuel substitution, for fuel switching from gas to electric. There's a lot of programs like that. Utilities like SoCal Edison are looking at every opportunity they can to start to move incentives that way and be really innovative in how they use their existing set of programs to be able to support that transition. In the low income programs that we have through the PUC, the commission right now is considering proposals to be able to use some of that money to help folks transition. So there's existing pots of money. There's also new pots of money or new requirements on existing pots of money that we're looking at. There's local governments who have both offered incentives, and in terms of financial incentives, there's air districts that have done this. There's CCAs that are pushing this. There's also, Tech and Build are two programs created by 1477 that were mentioned. That's $200 million. Part of that is for new affordable housing. So that's going to be really important to get right from the start. And the other part of that is Tech, which is a statewide market transformation program that will be looking at making sure that there's actually vendors and suppliers and incentives all up supply chain so that you can easily do this in your house, because it's not easy everywhere yet. And 40% of those incentives will be targeted at low and moderate income families. So we just have like this plethora of really great advances. It's still early days. As I said, like 60% of homes in the US are already being built all electric. But in California, that hasn't been the case. So this is a change, but it's something that we're sort of getting ready for. And at all levels of government, we're sort of gearing up to do this. We're going to see some hitches along the way, but we really do have a huge amount of momentum already.
We really need to leverage that power of signaling and investment at this point for the future. Supervisor, how would you sort of respond to that, given your role in overseeing the county? What do you think we need to see to really encourage that transition?
I mean, I think Marion's the expert and so much more wonky on these issues than me. So I feel like I'm learning from her. But I definitely echo the point that it's really all about incentives. And I think at the county level, some of the challenges we have directly is that we don't have as many incentives as we do at the statewide level. It's just they're not there. So in the unincorporated areas, we do have significantly more incentives, regulatory incentives around building approval and building standards. In the incorporated areas, it's much more difficult, right? Because those are not in the direct jurisdiction of the county. So in that context, we're really having to look at different kinds of incentives, be those subsidies or creating economies of scale by providing model buildings. So I think those are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking at, and that's also why I do think there's a lot of value for us, at least in the initial stages, focusing on our own county buildings, because then it creates I think it can create a knock-on effect in terms of, scaling up work. Once you do it once for one big customer, one big client, it's a lot easier to sort of build that out beyond that. But again, I think I'm more learning from the experts here and just, trying to be a good partner in setting that up at the county.
Thank you. And Commissioner McAllister, to get maybe a little bit more technical into the code, what do you really see as those inflection points? We've talked a lot about new buildings, but when we look at existing buildings as well, what do you see these inflection points that are really going to help support a just transition?
Well, I mean, again, there's just a massive amount. There are lots of pieces to this puzzle, and each one, is kind of targeted to a specific idea. I mean, I think, $200 million sounds like a lot, but it's really a drop in the bucket, right? And so we really need to figure out. I think that figuring out ways to pay for this, so if you think about what a healthy ecosystem of delivery looks like, it's got a contractor that talks to a homeowner or a business owner and says, I've got this equipment and I'm going to put it in your home and business. Or if I've got a contract with a county government or a city government, those projects have to be viable projects. That customer needs to have a value proposition that they can perceive and that they want that product. And so building that market, takes a little bit of time. I think it's happening. I mean, what we have in our favor is that this is a better product, right? You didn't know you wanted that iPhone until you wanted that iPhone. Until you got that iPhone, you're like, why didn't I know I wanted this? But electric and end-use technologies, just they're better in a lot of different ways. They're cleaner, they're healthier, and when we get some scale, we're going to see that the costs actually drop tremendously. And so, there's a lot of alignment on those issues, and it's going to be spotty in different parts of the state. We're going to see different kinds of uptake rather of the various technologies. But I was happy to hear about that induction pilot, because I have an all electric house with a great induction cooktop, and I would never go back, right? So I think the proof is in proof of the pudding's in the taste. I think people will know it when they get it. I would point out though, California, we lead on a lot of fronts, and I would argue that we're leading on this code front as well. Most states don't even do their own building code. Most states standardize around the International Energy Conservation Code, and they don't have control over that. And so they can go a little further and do bits and pieces, but most states do not have the resources to do that. And so, in areas where you have a lot of all electric buildings, it's usually for a couple of reasons that don't apply in California. One, they have cheap power, and it's either coal or it's large hydro subsidized by the federal government. And then, and also they just don't have a lot of gas distribution. And so I think the spike in the Texas load was largely resistance baseboard heating that people had to turn on when it got cold. We would never allow that in the building code. And so I think we already have incredibly efficient, highly engineered, very competently constructed buildings, and an ecosystem of builders that actually does, that actually can respond to this market, to this imperative that we're talking about. But they need a little bit of flexibility. They have different market niches. They have different geographical areas that they're targeting. So, you know, we need to work with all these stakeholders, including the OEMs that make the heat pumps, HVAC, and the water heaters, and all the rest of it. We have to work with their supply chains and the reality that's there. So, you know, doing projects needs capital, it needs a will, it needs a value proposition, and it needs a brand. And so we have to build that.
And last question here before I transition back to Colleen, and I'll sort of direct this back to you, Commissioner, because it's sort of an easy one here, maybe before the break. But how do you look at embodied carbon as part of the code, in addition to operational carbon, as you look at the code evolving?
Well, I mean, that's an easy one because really we don't embrace it. I mean, the building code doesn't do a lot with embodied carbon or embodied energy for that matter. So I think that's sort of the new frontier. You know, life cycle assessment is a tool that we really need to be using more across state government. You know, DGS and you know, our own investments in facilities. You know, that we're beginning to think about that, but that's a new realm that probably would require a new regulatory. You know, you're talking products, you're talking supply chain, you're talking a lot of different things that really we don't regulate directly. Certainly not at the Energy Commission, and so I think there's a broader conversation about embodied that will have to take place as we get towards our zero carbon goal.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to work in one of our green building issues for the rest of our here a little bit. Well, thank you very much for the Q&A. I'm going to transition to Colleen now, so she can explain some of our networking that's going to come up here in just a moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And thank you so much to our awesome set of panelists.